2018 is almost over, and it's time to give out the year-end awards. This will be exclusive to the WWE, and it will include both the main roster and NXT. There will be some awards that will be exclusive to just the main roster, others will be exclusive to just NXT, and there will be some in which both will be eligible. And no, this will not include independent wrestling, this will not include New Japan, this will not include Ring of Honor or Impact. And that's because this channel is dedicated to reviewing content from the WWE, and the content that is reviewed comes from either the main roster or NXT, and I've decided to make the awards exclusive to the content that I've reviewed. So nothing against other professional wrestling, it's just it makes sense for this channel to just do WWE. And before I get to the awards, I want to look back on the year as a whole. And I have to say, if you were to judge the WWE in 2018, I would say there was a lot of cold periods, mostly cold, but there was also a lot of hot periods. There was not necessarily the product as a whole being hot. There was a lot of hot storylines, and there was a lot of hot characters. There were some breakout stars for sure, most notably Becky Lynch. And there were, however, there was a lot of slumps, and there was a lot of slumps in the ratings. There was times when the product became unwatchable. There were times where it seemed like the entire creative team, far more than Raw than SmackDown, was just, coasting. They were coasting during the non-eventful seasons. The WWE product is usually seasonal. There's WrestleMania season, there's the Rumble season, there's SummerSlam, Survivor Series. It seemed like the other seasons, it seemed like they were just coasting and getting ready to prepare themselves for other bigger events than what they had at the time. So there were certainly a lot of cold periods, but again, the whole year, it wasn't a horrible year. However, I would say it was kind of a forgettable year. It was a year that I don't think people are going to be looking back on, 2018, what a memorable year. I think 2018 will be looked upon as having some memorable moments, some memorable stories, a lot of stories that were negative, a lot of them that were negative that had nothing to do with the product. And I think it'll be mostly known as just another year around this whole WWE Network era. I don't think it'll be remembered as an eventful year. That's my opinion of the whole year. It wasn't a horrible year. I think it was similar to 2017 when I did my year-end awards for that year. Not a horrible year. It's just, a kind of a forgettable year. Nothing really changed this year, but there were the biggest news stories, I think, had to do outside of the squared circle. And that was for the main roster. For NXT, I would say this was NXT's best year. I think in terms of the TakeOver shows, all of them were great. I think the Gargano Ciampa storyline, I would say NXT had their best year in 2018. And they've had a lot of great years. They've lost a lot of stars to the main roster, but I think NXT was just fantastic. It was just dynamite for the entire year. They never really lost their momentum. They built new stars. Even though when they lost stars, they just kept building and building, and the shows were just, the TakeOver shows were fantastic. And the whole weekly show of NXT was usually very solid. So without further ado, let's get to the awards. The best of and worst of 2018 year-end awards. The first award is the Male Wrestler of the Year, and the winner of this award is Seth Rollins, who consistently throughout the entire year had great matches. And they were on Raw, they were on pay-per-views. He constantly had great matches throughout the entire year. Now, you can say maybe from a storyline perspective, he wasn't always the focal point. I can understand that. But when you look at in-ring work, he has to be number one, because I don't think there's anyone in the entire company, and that includes NXT, who had as many great matches throughout the entire year as Rollins. There wasn't a match he might have not had the match of the year. I'll say that. But throughout his entire body of work, Rollins was great. Every single pay-per-view, Rollins almost always had one of, if not the best matches on the entire show. And if you were to look at the entire main roster pay-per-view year, I think Rollins, the majority of the pay-per-views had the best match of the night. So he was great in ring. There was parts of the year which his character got a little stale for me, but I think his in-ring work was just fantastic. And other candidates you could have said were maybe AJ Styles, who I believe AJ Styles was champion the majority of the year, the WWE champion the majority of the year. However, there was a lot of parts where he was very stale as champion. There was a lot of times he had disappointing matches on pay-per-view, most notably with Shinsuke Nakamura. You could say Daniel Bryan, but let's be honest. When Daniel Bryan first came back, for the first few months, his return was very lackluster until he turned heel and he was amazing. However, throughout his whole body of work, it doesn't compare to Rollins. You can say from NXT, Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa, each of them had fantastic years, and you can make an argument, but I would still say Rollins' entire body of work outweighs them. And even though they had better matches than Rollins, I don't think Rollins had a match on the level of Gargano versus Ciampa. However, he had so many, I think his entire body of work gives him this award. The next category is the Female Wrestler of the Year. This was interesting because it's very unanimous who's going to win. I think everyone who's doing an award show is going to choose who I'm going to choose, and that's Becky Lynch, of course. But the thing is, it seems like if this was any other year in which Becky Lynch was not having this year, it would be very difficult to choose between Ronda Rousey and Charlotte Flair, who also had great matches. You have to give them credit. You have one unanimous winner. Becky Lynch was fantastic this entire year. She went from a name on the main roster to a legitimate superstar. And they use that term a lot. No, Becky Lynch became a superstar this year. She became a player on the main roster. She became one of the most popular wrestlers in the entire company. And she began calling herself the man, and not to do with gender or anything, but mainly because she believes she is the man. We all know the term the man, the best, the guy. Who is the guy in the company? The man is Becky Lynch this year. She had the best year. I think she had, if this were to come down to as wrestler of the year, male or female, I would choose Becky Lynch over Seth Rollins. She was great. She just became such a big star this year. And two runners-up are Ronda Rousey and Charlotte Flair, who, if Becky Lynch did this in any other year and she wasn't as hot as she was this year, they would have been like a toss-up of who would have won, because they were both excellent. 3 major names. And I would like to say this again. I want to see a triple threat main event. Ronda versus Charlotte versus Becky in the main event of WrestleMania. I think that's the way to go. They both had great years, but Becky wins this award. Just a fantastic year. Arguably, I would say this. I think this was the best year a female has ever had in the history of the WWE. That's how far I'd go. Other than that, I mean, Asuka, she won the Rumble. She had a great match with Charlotte at WrestleMania, but the majority of the year she, was doing nothing. They did nothing with her creatively. She came back and won the title at the end of the year, but she was doing nothing for the majority of the year. So she, if you were to look at her entire year, I think it would still be a good year for Asuka, but she doesn't compare to Becky. And everyone else on the main roster was had fairly mediocre years, and some of them had horrible years. On NXT, Kairi Sane wasn't champion for very long. I wouldn't include her as a nominee. Shayna Baszler, she should be considered, but she shouldn't be close. I think she doesn't touch Becky's year, and she doesn't come close to either Ronda or Charlotte, in my opinion. So, had another good year, but not worthy, in my opinion, of this award. This has to go to Becky Lynch. Next is Tag Team of the Year, and so I forgot to mention, NXT is eligible for this award, as they were the previous 2 awards, and the winner of this award is going to the Undisputed Era, who runs away with Tag Team of the Year, mainly because the tag teams on the main roster really sucked this year. They were really good in 2017. It's really disappointing. In 2018, it was a flop. Not many good tag teams at all. The Bar, very stale as champions, in my opinion. The New Day, same old shit. Usos, far of a step down from 2017. No one really else on the main roster. Bludgeon Brothers, they were kind of a flop as champions. AOP has been a disaster. Revival, don't get me started on that. Easily goes to Undisputed Era. Runner-up would go to Mustache Mountain. They had a good year too, but the entire company, best tag team, Undisputed Era, hands down. Breakout Star of the Year. Do we even need to talk about this? This is going to Becky Lynch. When she got punched in the face by Nia Jax on Raw, that just made her an even bigger star. It was crazy. She got pulled from the match, and she got some sympathy too. Becky Lynch on Twitter is a fucking savage. I feel sorry for the people she goes after on Twitter. She likes to pick on Alexa Bliss on Twitter. I feel sorry for Alexa Bliss. I bet Alexa Bliss is a sweet girl, but my God, Becky has no mercy on that poor girl. She will rip her heart out. And Ronda Rousey's making a complete ass out of herself on Twitter. She's just been a savage the entire year. Becky's my breakout star of the year, without question. So the next category is Match of the Year. And I wanted to do a Match of the Year for the WWE and for NXT. I want to give some respect to the WWE because I think the main roster limits of what they can do
have the matches they want. In NXT, I don't think there's much of a limit, and I think they let them go out there and tear it up. But for WWE, my match of the year on the main roster is going to Becky Lynch versus Charlotte Flair in the last woman standing match from Evolution. This was the best match on Evolution. I really enjoyed Evolution as a show, but this took the show to a new level. This was fantastic. Just a great match, and arguably the greatest women's match in the main roster on WWE history. A fantastic match between Becky and Charlotte. These two have such an intensity with each other. They beat the living hell out of each other. They kick each other's ass. It's crazy. There's so much intensity, and I know they're really close in real life. They're best friends, but when they get in the ring, it's fucking war. In my NXT match of the year, and this was tough, choosing between Johnny Gargano and Andrade Cien Almas from NXT TakeOver Philadelphia, or Johnny Gargano versus Tommaso Ciampa from NXT TakeOver New Orleans. I decided to go with the latter. I decided to go with Gargano and Ciampa because I just thought the story was so fantastic. It was such a great story in front of that WrestleMania New Orleans crowd. It made it even better, and it made it more epic, and it was so long, and it was very slow at parts, and there was parts of the match where I wasn't really into it, but I thought that when I look back, the entire story was so fantastic, and the entire story of this feud was told within this match. And Gargano, I love the finish. This was my favorite match of the entire year. I love Gargano and Ciampa. Best NXT match of the year, and in my opinion, the best match. If we were to include the entire main roster, this was easily the best, better than anything on the main roster. The one thing that comes close would be Gargano and Almas, which is a great runner-up from Philadelphia. Feud of the year, again, I'm going to do a WWE one and an NXT one. WWE Feud of the year, these are both unanimous. These are just both so far above anything else on the entire brands. It's not even funny. WWE Feud of the year, Charlotte versus Becky. Love this feud. It started off really slow, with SummerSlam, with Charlotte winning the title and the fans turning on her and they wanting to cheer Becky. It looked like a train wreck. At the end, when they started to trade the title, and then they had the match at Evolution, and then they continued their feud, and they eventually they were involved in a triple threat match. It looked like this feud is going to continue to 2019. This was easily the best feud on the WWE main roster. The entire year goes to Charlotte and Becky. The NXT Feud of the year, do we even need to talk about this? It's Johnny Gargano versus Tommaso Ciampa. We don't even need to have a discussion anymore. That's it. Promo of the year. My favorite promo this year, I'm going to go with Daniel Bryan's return promo, The Fight for Your Dreams. This, I'll be honest, this brought a tear to my eye. And this doesn't really happen. I don't like admitting that, but there was a couple of times with Daniel Bryan, I just thought the guy was so emotional there, and he talked about how much he missed wrestling. It was just a great promo. His return promo after he announced his retirement 2 years ago, he was able to announce he's been cleared and he's back for action. He will compete at WrestleMania. Just a fantastic promo, and it's tough. It's tough for that not to bring a tear to your eye. It's just great promo by Daniel Bryan, and all from the heart. It wasn't a Daniel Bryan promo. It was a Bryan Danielson promo. That was 100% from his heart. Just great. Man, it's hard to believe that guy's a heel now. How can that happen? How could they not tell the story of Daniel Bryan? He's finally cleared, and now he's having problems again with the guy who mocked him because he couldn't wrestle The Miz, and now The Miz has beaten him. He can't beat The Miz. The Miz is in his head. Then finally he wins the Royal Rumble, and then he finally beats The Miz at WrestleMania, and he gets the WWE Championship back. What a story in your hands, and you're not going to tell that story. Now he's actually become one of the, you know what? He is the best heel in the entire company. It's crazy to think that this would happen after that promo, but still just an amazing promo, even though he's a heel now. Announcer of the year. This includes everyone from WWE and NXT. I'm going to get Nigel McGuinness. Also, this would include the UK NXT too. I like this work. I like Morrow, but to me, Morrow just comes off too over the top. The Mamma Mia is fine. Just the pop culture references is too much. He has to include a pop culture reference during every single match he does. That was a little bit of a turn off. So I still like Morrow. On the main roster, Michael Cole sucks. Corey Graves irritates me. I really dislike Corey Graves. I really wish he'd be replaced. Tom Phillips is just kind of there for me. Byron Saxton, again, I can't tell the difference between him and Tom Phillips' voices, so again, kind of there for me. And Renee Young sucks. I'm sorry, Renee, but she has been horrible. And again, Michael Cole, I don't even want to talk about that. To me, best announcer goes to Nigel McGuinness. I enjoyed his work. I know it's not fair to compare NXT to the main roster because they don't have a 75 or 73-year-old maniac screaming in your ear, but I still think I enjoyed his commentary most, and I'm going to put him as the best announcer of the year. Comeback of the year. Daniel Bryan, I think, wins this pretty easily. I don't think there's anyone really comes close to his comeback. Great comeback and a great promo. Mainly because he was gone and he was such a big star. He was on top of the entire company. He won the WWE Championship in the main event of WrestleMania, and then of course he had to relinquish it. And then then he wins back the Intercontinental title the next year. Has to drop that. He has announced retirement, and then finally, after 3 years, he's cleared and he comes back and he has to win this award. I don't think you can put anyone else in consideration for comeback of the year. Headline of the year is a very sad story, the most heartbreaking story of the year, a story that just really, really is just horrible. And that's Roman Reigns announced he's been re-diagnosed with leukemia, and he will have to relinquish the WWE Universal Championship, and he will be off television. He'll be off the WWE as he has to go and treat his sickness of leukemia. Horrible story. Just really, it was like a punch in the gut when you heard it. And I know I've never been a big fan of Roman Reigns. Just when you heard that, it was just something that, oh man, it breaks your heart. Just a horrible, horrible story. And again, praying for Roman Reigns and his family as he continues to fight this. I'm sure he'll kick leukemia's ass, Superman punch it, spear it, and he'll make his way back to the WWE. So still best wishes to Roman Reigns. So the next one is the pay-per-view of the year. I decided to split this up again. I went with WWE Pay-Per-View of the Year and an NXT TakeOver of the Year. For the WWE Pay-Per-View of the Year, my favorite pay-per-view of the entire year is Evolution. I enjoyed Evolution more than any other show. I enjoyed it more than the Royal Rumble, more than WrestleMania, more than SummerSlam, and more than Survivor Series. I enjoyed the hell out of that show. And my expectations going into that show were very low because the build-up to that show was fucking garbage. And I'll say this again. There was no excuse for WWE to have the first ever all-woman pay-per-view and have that kind of build-up. The build-up to that show sucked. There's no doubt about it. The card was not good. It was a card of matches we've seen a lot. There was nothing on that card that really stuck out. And I'm still angry that they built it up. It was second fiddle to Crown Jewel for most of the time that leading up to the show. And that was disappointing. However, as a show, I loved it. I loved watching it. It was not too long. It was only a few hours. It was 3 instead of 4, which was easier. And I went back and watched it, and that's something that is significant because I almost never do that. I went back and I enjoyed watching Evolution for a second time. I really enjoyed the show. I enjoyed the flow of the show. It wasn't necessarily overbearing with WWE making a political statement or anything like that. It was just a great wrestling show, and I really, really enjoyed it. I was really happy for all the women getting that opportunity, and that was my favorite WWE show of the year. Favorite TakeOver show of the year. This was tough because all 5 are great. Philadelphia was great. New Orleans was great. Chicago 2 was great. Brooklyn 4 was great. And War Games Part 2 was great. However, I think it's very obvious which was the best one, and that was New Orleans. NXT TakeOver New Orleans was, in my opinion, by far the best TakeOver show. And all 4 of the other ones were great, but this one really stood out. This was just fantastic.
If you were to break down the entire card, you had 5 matches that were all strong. However, you had 2 match of the year contenders on that same show. You had Gargano and Ciampa in the main event, as I mentioned, the unsanctioned match. And you also had, in the opening match, you had a ladder match to determine the first ever NXT North American champion. That was also great. That was almost as good as the main event. Some say it was even better than the main event. That was just a fantastic ladder match, one of the greatest ladder matches in WWE history. And this show absolutely blew WrestleMania out of the water. This was so much of a better show than WrestleMania. It was sick how much better this was than the biggest show of the entire year. This was just such a better show. WrestleMania was very forgettable. I forgot about WrestleMania a couple weeks later. I did not forget about this show. And to look back at WrestleMania, if you were to look back at whenever you look back on an entire year, one thing that always has to stick out is WrestleMania. WrestleMania was not a very good show. It was not a horrible WrestleMania. There's been far worse WrestleManias than this. It's not even one of the worst. It's not also one of the best. It's probably in middle of the pack WrestleMania. Very forgettable show. I don't think people are going to ever look back at WrestleMania 34 as a show you have to go back and watch. I think most people will look at WrestleMania 34 as just another WrestleMania. We'll remember it was in New Orleans. It was as memorable as the other WrestleMania that was in New Orleans before that. So that's also something you have to look back on. The next category is the theme song of the year. And the theme song of the year goes to a theme song that I actually downloaded on my phone. That's appropriate because the theme song is this of a superstar who loves to phone it in. The laziest wrestler on the entire main roster. The theme song of Shinsuke Nakamura. It's Shadows of a Setting Sun. This was great. This is his updated song. Last year, the song he had actually since 2016 was great. I love the original song, but this was even better. This is a remix I think is even better. I enjoy this even more. It's a great song, even though Nakamura had a horrible year. Very disappointing year, especially where he started off. I still think this is an amazing song. So Shadows of a Setting Sun for Nakamura is my theme song of the year. Catchphrase of the year, The Man, Becky Lynch. We don't need to talk about this. Becky's just running away with almost half my awards, it seems like. Becky's just, what a great year she had. Next is the most overrated. This includes everyone. So the most overrated isn't necessarily someone who the internet or who wrestling fans all hype up, but I might not think is very good. It's someone who's pushed heavily, who doesn't deserve his push. That's what the most overrated is for. And it's easily, who else can win this award? Who else has been pushed to the way they've been pushed and has not had as strong of a performance as he would need to be pushed that way? Who has not been on TV yet is pushed more than anyone on the entire main roster? Who barely cuts promos? Who has mostly squash matches? Who else could win this award besides Brock Lesnar? Brock Lesnar is easily the most overrated of the year. I don't even want to even discuss this. This has just been a train wreck. Ever since he got the title last year, it's just been an absolute disaster. He got it, held it to SummerSlam, and he wins it back at Crown Jewel. He's probably going to hold it until WrestleMania 35, which he hopefully will lose. It's just been an absolute disaster. It's been horrible. It's hurt the main roster. It's hurt Raw heavily. And there's no value. What value does Brock Lesnar bring? Does when he comes back, do the ratings go up? They might, but do they go up significantly? I don't think so. I think if WWE were to build a main star and put the title on him, he'd be a much bigger deal than Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar to me is just, it's like beating a dead horse at this point. What else can we say? It is what it is. He's the most overrated on the entire main roster. The most underrated goes to Samoa Joe. Now, Samoa Joe has been pushed, but I don't think he's ever won a big match this year. He's been heavily pushed. His promos have been great. His matches have usually been very good. It's just he's never really won a big match. I think he should have beaten AJ Styles all the way back at SummerSlam to win the title. I think that was a mistake when they didn't give it to him. So he wins my most underrated. I think they could do a lot more and give him. It's not like they don't use him. I just wish they'd let him win more. And also, he's eliminated very early in the Survivor Series match. I know injuries have plagued Joe a lot, but I still think he should be winning more big matches. Now, let's get to the worst of the year. These are the worst awards. Not all the worst awards are the same as the best awards. There's a lot less of them. But I still think we need to talk about who really had terrible years in WWE, and there were some really down points of this year. So the first worst award goes to the worst male wrestler of the year. Well, who else is going to win this except the former interim Raw general manager, Baron Corbin? He runs away with this award. Just a horrible year. Killed Raw. Was the biggest reason the ratings were in the shitter. It's not fair to blame the entire reason the ratings were this bad on Baron Corbin, but he was a huge part of it because he was featured more than any other wrestler during the last part of the year in 2018 on Raw. Who else had this much screen time on the flagship television show than Baron Corbin? It was pathetic and it was embarrassing. He hurt the show significantly. He was horrible at his job. He's a horrible wrestler. Always been pushed. He's pushed because he's tall and Vince likes tall guys. There's nothing else to say other than Baron Corbin is trash. He's just horrible at his job. Dresses up as like a bartender and is just horrible.
Worst female wrestler of the year. This is, again, it's going to be so easy. Who else could you choose except Nia Jax, the same woman who got the big WrestleMania moment this year. They gave her the big moment. They gave her the title win at WrestleMania. From all the women, she had the one who got to win the title at WrestleMania. All of them, from Charlotte Flair to Becky Lynch to Asuka to Ronda Rousey, Alexa Bliss, Sasha Banks, Bayley, all the talent on the main roster. Nia Jax got to be the one who won the title. Now, all of them, there were others like Ronda and Charlotte who got Mania moments, but the one who actually got to win the belt was Nia. What a horrible year. Had that horrible feud with Alexa Bliss in which they pushed her, they shoved her down everyone's throats. They completely, they chose that feud over Sasha and Bayley. They heavily pushed that feud. It was a flop. It hurt Alexa. Nia was terrible in that feud. She had horrible matches. She had so much pay-per-view matches. She had 2 great matches with Ronda Rousey, yes, but we can't forget the amount of injuries she caused. She badly injures Becky Lynch on Monday Night Raw before Survivor Series. She ruins that match. That match was very hyped up. Everyone was really looking forward to seeing Ronda and Becky at Survivor Series. They did a great job of building that up. Nia punches Becky in the fucking nose, breaks her nose, because maybe Becky was too stiff with her. Yeah, Becky's the top woman, you idiot. Who the fuck do you think you are? Nia Jax just had a horrible year. Her matches were horrible. They pushed her because of the heat she had, and she lost to Ronda Rousey, thankfully, at TLC, and hopefully they never push her again. This is on The Rock. You blame The Rock for Nia Jax. Nia Jax is absolute horrible, and she at least needs to be sent down from NXT, if not fired, because she is garbage, and we all know why she is protected. We all know the reason. It's because of Dwayne. It's because of him. WWE does not want to anger The Rock in any way, so they have to keep Nia Jax on this television screen, who's just terrible at her job and needs to be fired. Also, who's horrible is her partner, Tamina, who also should be fired. The next feud the next award goes to the worst feud of the year. This goes to Bayley versus Sasha Banks. They had a horrible feud. They were supposed to have a match at WrestleMania. It never materialized. They wanted to go with Alexa Bliss and Nia Jax in that spot, and they also had Charlotte and Asuka, and they also had Ronda Rousey and Seth McMahon in the mixed tag match. So they didn't have enough spots for all the women. They got bumped to the pre-show battle royal. Didn't look like, okay, they didn't get WrestleMania. They're going to get maybe Backlash. No, nothing there. They're going to get SummerSlam for sure. Brooklyn, Sasha, and Bayley, 3 years after their classic match at TakeOver in SummerSlam. Perfect. Brooklyn's the place to do it. Nope. Even though they teased it heavily, they weren't even on the card, not even on the pre-show. All right, Evolution, perfect. They're going to pay it off. First ever one's pay-per-view. Nope. Oh, now they're friends again. They've become best friends again. They feud with the Riot Squad for 6 months. Both of them were very underutilized this year, and I feel bad for them because I can't help but it must really infuriate them to see their 2 other horsewoman counterparts, Charlotte Flair and Becky Lynch, having the 2 best years of their careers, both being featured heavily, having the best match on the pay-per-view consistently, tearing it up on Evolution while they're stuck facing the Riot Squad for like the 9,000th time. So I do have sympathy for them. It probably angers them, but it was what it was. It's unfortunate, but they have to get worst feud of the year. They teased it every week on Raw, and there was no payoff. Easily worst feud of the year. Worst match of the year. This comes from the worst show of the year, which I'll get to next. Crown Jewel. The main event of Crown Jewel. The return of the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels returns 8.5 years after he retires at WrestleMania 26 against The Undertaker. He comes back with a match in which he teams with Triple H as D-Generation X to take on The Undertaker and Kane, Reverse Destruction, in the main event of one of the worst shows of the year, one of the worst shows in WWE history, and just an embarrassing main event. Shawn Michaels almost dies from a moonsault because Undertaker and Kane can't catch him. Undertaker and Kane can barely move. This match was horrible. Triple H tears his pec. This is just a disaster of a main event. That also leads into the worst show of the year. That's Crown Jewel. Just a horrible, 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 horrible show. The main event, which I talked about, he had Brock Lesnar squashing Braun Strowman. He had Shane McMahon winning the best in the world. Just a disastrous show. The only thing noteworthy was Hulk Hogan making his return. But WWE can't talk about that. Just a horrible, horrible show, and I'm not going to even get into the controversy of Saudi Arabia. It's just that show as a wrestling show was absolute trash. Finally, worst storyline of the year. Baron Corbin is Raw General Manager. Again, he won the worst wrestler of the year. Was anyone else going to win? That has to win. So that'll be it for the awards. Oh, also, I wanted to do a couple more. Worst announcer of the year. This is going to Corey Graves, who I do not like. The worst return of the year, which I'm going to make this a separate exclusive award, just probably exists this year, to give this to someone who deserves to win worst return, and that's Dean Ambrose. So not his fault, just been booked horribly. Easily the worst return of the year. So that wraps up the awards. Not necessarily a great year for the WWE in 2018. I think it was another year. It wasn't a horrible year. It was kind of just another paint by the numbers year. You have your hot parts, you have your cold parts. I think the network this last few years from 2014 to this year and on forward has made it such that the lesser shows are even lesser than they were when there were pay-per-views, and the bigger shows seem bigger because WWE has gone all out. They've gone to make these shows 4 hours. And like WrestleMania is 5 hours, the other 3 or 4, with 2-hour pre-shows, and it's become very difficult to watch all the way through. And I think because of that, they've decided to almost phone in like the non-Big 4 pay-per-view months. So I think I wouldn't even call it Big 4; I'd call it a Big 3. And by 3, WrestleMania is the real big one, if you want to make it like that. The other two are they work on the other two, but Mania is the one they push, and I feel like there's too many other times, and unless there's a show that they also have to hype up, maybe like the Saudi Arabia shows, things like that. I feel like WWE really mailed it in for a lot of parts of the year, and the only time they really got hot was a lot of times not by their own power. I mean, they got big news stories out of things that they didn't want to become big news stories. A lot of them were negative. Some of them were very sad. They had some returns, so I don't think they really capitalized on a lot of them. So the entire year, again, was really, there's a lot more that could have been accomplished. I feel like they can improve greatly in 2019. I think a lot of 2018 was done to set up 2019. I think the strongest part of 2018 was the woman. I think that'll be remembered. I think Becky Lynch was the best part of this year. I think we'll remember her for just having a fantastic year and really setting up 2019. We'll see what they do next year, but I think if there's one thing in 2019 I expect to see, and that's the first ever women's main event of WrestleMania. So again, not a great year for the company. There was some great stuff in NXT, the Gargano Ciampa stuff. There was a lot of parts I really enjoyed. But as a whole year, I wouldn't say it was a particularly going to be known as a very memorable year. So 2018's, again, almost over. Let's enjoy the last few days of the year. Wishing everyone a happy new year. Enjoy your new year, everybody. Don't get too wasted, please. And let's hopefully in 2019 we get some good professional wrestling all the way through. Let's hope WWE gives up some great stuff. Let's hope New Japan, Ring of Honor, Impact, everybody. PWG, all wrestling is great in 2019. And hopefully we get a great WrestleMania next year, because a great WrestleMania usually means that the year will be remembered better if you have a great show. So, if the biggest show of the year delivers, usually the rest of the year will be looked back on fondly. So that's it for 2018, I guess. Hopefully 2019 is a great year for wrestling.